Rose Stone's alarm went off at 6:30 a.m. with the irritating sound of an ambulance, but she didn't wake up. Not because she was sleeping deeply. In fact, she had spent the entire night awake, sitting on her kitchen floor, surrounded by a mountain of overdue bills that seemed to multiply like evil gremlins. The electricity bill, cut off in 2 days. Rent, 3 weeks overdue. Credit card, blocked last night when she tried to buy a measly coffee at Starbucks. Perfect, she muttered, running her hands through her disheveled blonde hair that looked like it had been attacked by a blender. Just perfect. That's when her phone exploded in a symphony of notifications. First, an email from the online coaching company where she worked. Rose, we regret to inform you that your services will no longer be needed due to recent negative customer feedback. Second, a message from her landlord. 48 hours to settle up or eviction. Third, and this was the final blow, a bank notification. Checking account, $47.83. Rose threw her phone onto the couch like it was a grenade about to explode and started laughing. A hysterical, desperate laugh, the kind that precedes either divine revelation or a complete nervous breakdown. "Okay, universe," she said to the cracked ceiling of her tiny Brooklyn apartment. "You win. I officially surrender." At that exact moment, as if the cosmos had decided it hadn't tortured Rose Stone enough that day, the phone rang. She looked at the unknown number and, out of pure masochism, answered. "Rose Stone?" The voice had an accent she couldn't immediately identify, but it sounded like dark chocolate mixed with pure arrogance. "Yes, who's speaking?" "My name is Marcus Whitfield. I'm executive assistant to Mr. Francesco Rossi. The gentleman needs an English teacher specialized in American slang and United States corporate culture. Urgently. Are you available to start today?" Rose blinked several times, thinking she was still dreaming, or having a nervous breakdown. Possibly both. Excuse me, how did you get my number?" "Your teaching agency gave us your contact as one of the best colloquial English specialists in the city. Payment is $1,000 per week with possibility of bonuses if progress is satisfactory." Rose almost dropped the phone. $1,000 per week? That was more than she made in an entire month teaching online classes to bored teenagers who preferred playing video games to learning grammar. "I accept," she said quickly, before the universe changed its mind and decided to make her even more miserable. "Excellent. The address is Penthouse 47A on Park Avenue. Be there at 10 a.m. "And Miss Stone?" "Yes?" "Mr. Rossi is particular. Very particular. He has no patience for traditional teaching methods and despises anything related to American culture. Good luck." The call ended, leaving Rose holding the phone and staring at the bills scattered across the floor. For one glorious moment, she allowed herself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, the universe wasn't completely determined to destroy her. 2 hours later, Rose stood in front of the most expensive building in Manhattan she had ever seen in her life, wearing her only professional outfit, a black blazer she bought on clearance 3 years ago, and a skirt that was definitely too tight after the last few months of a diet based on instant noodles and anxiety. The doorman, who probably earned more in a day than she did in a week, looked at her with an expression that clearly said, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" "Rose Stone," she announced, trying to sound confident. "I'm here to see Mr. Francesco Rossi." The doorman checked a list and, with poorly disguised surprise, motioned for her to follow toward the elevators. Rose entered the golden elevator and pressed the button for the 47th floor, wondering if it was possible to die of nervousness before reaching her destination. When the doors opened directly into the penthouse, because, of course, rich people don't need hallways, Rose found herself face to face with what could only be described as an apartment straight out of an architecture magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, furniture that probably cost more than her annual rent, and art she was sure she had seen in museums. "You must be the teacher." Rose turned and almost choked. Francesco Rossi was leaning against the gourmet kitchen counter, holding a coffee cup like it was a fashion accessory. He was tall, dark, with perfectly tousled dark hair, and a jawline that seemed to have been sculpted by Michelangelo during a particularly inspired day. He wore a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves revealing forearms that definitely weren't the result of a sedentary life behind office desks. But it was his eyes that caught her off guard, green, intense, and completely cold when they landed on her. "You're late," he said in English with an Italian accent that, inconveniently, made Rose's stomach do a little flip. Rose looked at her watch. 10:03 a.m. 3 minutes, she replied, forcing a smile. Technically, that's within Manhattan traffic's margin of error. Francesco didn't smile back. In fact, his expression became even colder, if that were possible. Margin of error, he repeated slowly, as if the words tasted bad. Interesting American concept. In Italy, when we say 10 o'clock, we mean 10 o'clock. Not 10:03, not 10:01, 10 o'clock. Rose felt her cheeks heat up. Great. 5 minutes on the job and she was already being reprimanded by the most attractive and apparently most arrogant client she had ever encountered. "You're right," she said, deciding that humility was her best strategy. "Sorry for being late. Shall we begin?" Francesco studied her for a long moment as if deciding whether she was adequate for the task or if he should send her back to the ground floor immediately. "Marcus told me you're a specialist in colloquial English." He pronounced the word colloquial as if it were something mildly obscene. "Yes, I teach American slang, idiomatic expressions, informal corporate language, everything you'll need to integrate into United States business culture." "Integrate," Francesco repeated, taking a sip of coffee. "As if I were a refugee needing to assimilate." Rose blinked. "No, I didn't mean. I don't want to integrate into American culture," he continued, cutting her off. "I don't want to embrace your superficial values or learn to smile falsely while shaking hands with people who despise everything I believe in. I just need to learn enough of your language to survive 6 months in New York without making a complete fool of myself. Nothing more." Rose swallowed hard. $1,000 per week, she reminded herself. Overdue bills. Imminent eviction. "Right," she said, forcing another smile. "We can work with that. Where would you like to start?" Francesco placed the cup on the counter and walked to a coffee table where several documents were scattered. "I have an important video conference tomorrow with potential American investors. I need to sound, how do you say, professional?" "Professional," Rose corrected automatically. Francesco stopped and looked at her with an expression that could freeze hell. "Sorry," Rose said quickly. "Continue." "As I was saying, I need to make a good impression. These investors control billions of dollars and are known for being demanding. I can't afford to make mistakes." Rose nodded, pulling a notepad from her bag. "What kind of business will you be discussing?" "Expansion of my technology company into the American market. App development, strategic partnerships, those things." "Okay, great. Let's work on corporate vocabulary and some expressions that will make you sound more American." Francesco grimaced as if she had suggested he cut off a leg. "Not American, just competent in English." "Of course, sorry." For 2 hours, Rose worked with Francesco on basic business vocabulary, idiomatic expressions, and corporate slang. He was a quick learner, she had to admit, but he was also impossible. He questioned every expression, criticized every aspect of American culture she tried to explain, and had an impressive ability to make her feel stupid with just one look. "This expression," he said, pointing to a phrase in her notebook, "knock it out of the park. Why are Americans obsessed with sports? Why can't they simply say do excellent work?" "Because knock it out of the park has more impact," Rose explained patiently. "It's more memorable, more colorful. It shows enthusiasm. False enthusiasm. Not false, just expressive." Francesco sighed as if he were explaining complex mathematics to a child. "In Italy, when we do business, we're direct. No baseball metaphors, no exaggerated smiles, no small talk about the weather. Business is business." Rose felt a pang of irritation. "Well, you're not in Italy anymore. If you want to succeed here, you need to learn to play by our rules." "Your rules," Francesco repeated, and Rose realized she had stepped on a landmine. He got up from his chair and walked to the window, looking down at the city below with an expression that mixed contempt and resignation. "Do you know why I'm here, Miss Stone? Why I left my perfectly good life in Milan to come to this noisy and superficial metropolis?" Rose shook her head, sensing she was about to hear something important. Because my father built an empire and, when he died, he left me a choice. Expand to the United States or watch everything he worked his entire life to build be swallowed by American competitors who don't respect tradition, quality, or craftsmanship. They only care about numbers, profit, and growth. He turned to face her, and Rose saw something vulnerable in his eyes for a split second before he hid it behind the mask of arrogance again. So no, I don't want to learn your rules. I need to learn your rules. There's a difference. Rose felt her heart tighten a little. She knew that feeling, doing something you hate because you have no choice. I understand, she said softly. Let's make this as painless as possible, okay? Francesco studied her for a moment as if he were reassessing his initial impressions of her. Okay, he said finally, but no baseball metaphors. Rose smiled, her first genuine smile since she arrived. No baseball metaphors, promise. They returned to work, and Rose began to notice that, underneath all that Italian arrogance, Francesco Rossi was actually intelligent, funny, when he wasn't being a complete snob, and surprisingly vulnerable when he thought no one was paying attention. The problem was that she was paying attention. A lot of attention, which, considering he obviously saw her as nothing more than a temporary and irritating necessity, probably wasn't a good idea. But when Francesco smiled, really smiled, for the first time that afternoon after she explained why Americans say awesome for everything from hamburgers to PowerPoint presentations, Rose knew she was in trouble. Big, complicated, and completely inconvenient trouble. And she hadn't even taught him the wrong slang yet. Rose arrived at Francesco's penthouse at exactly 9:30 a.m. the next morning, determined not to be late again. She had spent the entire previous evening researching corporate slang and preparing what she was convinced would be the perfect crash course in sounding American in business meetings. What she hadn't counted on was finding Francesco pacing his living room like a caged panther, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe, and looking like he was about to face a firing squad rather than a video conference. "Thank God you're here," he said without preamble, running a hand through his dark hair. "This meeting starts in 30 minutes, and I feel like I'm about to make a fool of myself in front of the most important investors on the East Coast." Rose had never seen him anything less than completely composed, and the slight crack in his armor was both endearing and slightly terrifying. "Okay, breathe," she said, setting down her bag and pulling out her notes. "We've got this. I've prepared some key phrases that will make you sound confident, approachable, and totally American." Francesco stopped pacing and looked at her with something that might have been hope. "Show me." Rose opened her notebook and cleared her throat dramatically. "First, when you're introducing your company, you want to sound enthusiastic but not desperate. So instead of just saying your company is good or successful, you say it's totally hot." Francesco frowned. "Hot? Like temperature?" No. Hot means popular, trending, everyone wants it. It's current slang. Very American." She wrote it down in large letters. Totally hot, very popular, successful. "Next," Rose continued, warming up to her subject. "When they ask about your target demographic, you don't want to sound boring or technical. You say you're targeting smoking hot babes. That means attractive, successful young women with disposable income." Francesco's frown deepened. "Babes? Like babies?" "God, no," Rose laughed. "Babes means attractive women. It's casual, friendly. Shows you understand your market." She added to her notes, "Smoking hot babes. Attractive female consumers." "And finally," Rose said, feeling quite proud of her linguistic coaching, "when they compliment your presentation or ideas, you don't just say, 'Thank you.' You say, 'Thanks, you're such a hottie for saying that.' It means they're being really nice and supportive." Francesco stared at her. "Hottie means nice?" "Exactly, it's like saying someone is a really cool, awesome person, super casual and American." She completed her notes. "You're such a hottie. You're very kind, cool." Francesco studied the notes for a moment, then looked up at Rose with an expression she couldn't quite read. Are you certain about these expressions? Absolutely, Rose said confidently. Trust me, I've been teaching American slang for years. These will make you sound like a native speaker. What Rose didn't mention was that she had learned most of her current slang from watching reality TV shows at 2 a.m. when she couldn't sleep, and her understanding of business terminology came primarily from movies and her own creative interpretation of things she'd overheard in coffee shops near Wall Street. But Francesco looked so nervous, and she wanted so desperately to help him succeed, that she convinced herself her crash course in American colloquialisms was exactly what he needed. All right, Francesco said, straightening his tie. Let's practice once more. They ran through a mock conversation, with Rose playing the role of an American investor. Francesco's accent made even the most ridiculous phrases sound somehow sophisticated, and Rose found herself thinking that he could probably read the phone book and make it sound sexy. Focus, Rose, she told herself. Professional. This is work. Perfect, she said as Francesco finished his practice pitch. You sound completely natural. They're going to love you. At exactly 10 a.m., Francesco sat down at his massive mahogany desk, adjusted his laptop camera, and joined the video conference. Rose positioned herself just out of frame, where she could watch and provide moral support. The screen filled with 3 faces, 2 older men in expensive suits, and 1 woman who looked like she could buy and sell small countries before lunch. Rose recognized them immediately from business magazines. These were the kind of investors who could make or break entire industries with a single decision. Good morning, Mr. Rossi, said the woman, who introduced herself as Catherine Blackwood, managing partner at Blackwood Capital. We're very excited to hear about your expansion plans. Good morning, Francesco replied smoothly. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me. I'm here to tell you about my company, which is absolutely totally hot right now in the European market. Rose felt a little thrill of pride. He was nailing it. One of the men, introduced as Robert Chen from Chen & Associates, leaned forward with interest. That's great to hear. Can you tell us more about your target demographic? Francesco smiled confidently. Of course. We're primarily targeting smoking hot babes between the ages of 25 and 45 with high disposable income and strong social media presence. Rose watched as all 3 investors' faces went through a remarkable transformation. Catherine Blackwood's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. Robert Chen's mouth fell open slightly. The 3rd investor, James Morrison, started coughing as if he'd swallowed his coffee wrong. But Francesco, blissfully unaware of the bomb he'd just dropped, continued enthusiastically. These smoking hot babes are exactly the demographic that drives consumer trends in technology and lifestyle products. They're influential, they're connected, and they're always looking for the next hot thing. Catherine Blackwood's expression had gone from surprised to something that looked suspiciously like she was trying not to laugh, or possibly planning to call security. See? She said carefully. And how do you plan to reach these smoking hot babes? Rose felt the first stirring of unease in her stomach, but Francesco was on a roll. Social media campaigns, influencer partnerships, targeted advertising on platforms where smoking hot babes spend most of their time. We want to make sure every smoking hot babe in America knows about our product. James Morrison made a choking sound that he tried to cover with another cough. That's certainly a unique approach to market segmentation, Robert Chen said, his voice carefully neutral. Rose started to panic. Something was wrong. The investors looked like they were attending the most awkward business meeting of their lives, but Francesco seemed completely oblivious, powered by what he clearly thought was his newfound mastery of American business speak. Now, Francesco continued, I'd like to show you our projected growth charts and explain why I believe this expansion will be incredibly profitable for all of us. He launched into his presentation, which was actually brilliant. His technology was genuinely innovative. His business model was solid and his financial projections were impressive. Rose found herself getting caught up in his passion for his work, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about the problems his app could solve and the markets it could revolutionize. For about 10 minutes, Rose forgot about the slang debacle and just watched Francesco being brilliant. Then Catherine Blackwood interrupted him. "Mr. Rossi, this is all very impressive, but I have to ask, are you always so colorful in your language during business presentations?" Francesco looked puzzled. "Colorful? The way you refer to your target demographic," James Morrison clarified, still looking like he was fighting back laughter. "Oh, that," Francesco said, waving a hand dismissively. "My English teacher taught me that Americans prefer casual, friendly language in business settings. I'm just trying to sound more, what's the word? Relatable." Rose's blood turned to ice water. "Oh no. Oh no, no, no. Your English teacher," Catherine repeated slowly, "taught you to refer to women as smoking hot babes in a professional context?" "Yes, she said it means attractive, successful women with disposable income. Very American expression." The three investors exchanged looks that could have communicated entire novels worth of information. "I see," Catherine said. "Well, Mr. Rossi, your presentation is quite interesting, but I think we need to discuss some cultural sensitivities before we can move forward with any potential partnership." Rose watched in horror as Francesco's confident expression began to crumble into confusion. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Robert Chen cleared his throat. "Mr. Rossi, I don't know what your English teacher told you, but referring to women as smoking hot babes in a business context is inappropriate. It's actually quite offensive." Francesco's face went pale. "Offensive?" "Extremely," James Morrison confirmed. "It's the kind of language that could get you sued for sexual harassment in an American workplace." Rose felt like she was going to throw up, or faint, or possibly both. Francesco looked directly into the camera, and Rose could see the exact moment he realized what had happened. I apologize," he said, his voice suddenly formal and strained. "I was clearly given incorrect information about American business terminology. Please forgive me." Catherine Blackwood's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Rossi, your business concept is genuinely impressive, and it's clear you're passionate about your work. But given this conversation, I think we need to table this discussion until you've had a chance to work with someone who can properly advise you on American business culture." "Of course," Francesco said quietly. "I understand completely. We'll be in touch," Robert Chen said diplomatically, which Rose knew was business speak for, "Don't call us, we'll call you." The screen went black. Francesco sat staring at his laptop for a long moment, then slowly turned to look at Rose. "Smoking hot babes," he said quietly, "means attractive, successful women with disposable income?" Rose wished the floor would open up and swallow her whole. I thought." "You thought," Francesco repeated, standing up from his desk. "You thought you would teach me slang that would make me sound like a sexual predator in front of three of the most powerful investors in New York." "I didn't know," Rose protested, jumping up from her chair. "I swear to God, Francesco, I thought those were normal expressions." "Normal expressions." His voice was getting dangerously quiet. "Rose, did you just destroy the most important business meeting of my life because you taught me pickup lines instead of professional terminology?" Rose opened her mouth to defend herself, then closed it again. Because, when she really thought about it, that was exactly what had happened. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Francesco, I am so sorry." Francesco walked to the window and stood with his back to her, his shoulders tense. "Do you know what I just did?" he asked, his voice barely controlled. "I just spent 20 minutes telling three of the most influential investors in America that I want to target smoking hot babes with my business plan. I called Catherine Blackwood, a woman who controls $8 billion in investment capital, a hottie for complimenting my presentation." Rose felt tears starting to burn behind her eyes. "We can fix this. I can call them, explain that it was a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding." Francesco turned around, and Rose had never seen anyone look so furious and hurt at the same time. "Rose, these people are going to tell everyone they know about the Italian idiot who doesn't understand the difference between business terminology and and whatever the hell you taught me. I'll fix it, Rose said desperately. I'll call them right now and explain everything. Explain what? That my English teacher is incompetent? That I'm too stupid to know the difference between appropriate and inappropriate language? That I'm exactly the kind of foreigner who shouldn't be trusted with American business deals? Each word hit Rose like a physical blow. Francesco, please. Get out. What? Get out of my apartment. Now. Rose felt like she'd been slapped. Francesco, let me explain. There's nothing to explain, he said, walking to the door and opening it. You were hired to help me succeed in American business culture. Instead, you've probably ended my chances of expanding to this market before I even got started. Rose gathered her things with shaking hands, her mind racing to find something, anything, she could say to fix this disaster. I know you're angry, she said as she reached the door, and you have every right to be. But your presentation was amazing. Your technology is incredible. This doesn't have to be the end of everything. Francesco looked at her for a long moment, and Rose saw something flicker in his eyes. Hurt, disappointment, maybe even a trace of the connection she thought they'd been building. Then his expression hardened again. Doesn't it? He asked quietly. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I just proved that my father was right about one thing. Americans and Italians don't mix. We don't understand each other. We don't speak the same language, and when we try to work together, someone always gets hurt. He stepped back and started to close the door. Francesco, wait. Goodbye, Rose. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the sudden silence of the hallway. Rose stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, before walking slowly to the elevator. As the golden doors closed and she began her descent back to reality, she pulled out her phone and did something she probably should have done days ago. She Googled "smoking hot babes" business terminology. The first result made her stomach drop to her shoes. Sexual harassment in the workplace. Inappropriate terms and phrases to avoid. Right there, in bold letters under extremely offensive examples. Hot. Babe. Hottie. Never use these terms to describe colleagues, clients, or customers. Rose closed her eyes and leaned against the elevator wall. Oh, Francesco, she whispered to herself. What have I done? But even as she stood there drowning in guilt and self-recrimination, a small, stubborn part of her brain was already working on a plan. Because Francesco Rossi might think this was the end of his American business dreams, but Rose Stone had just realized something important. She was going to fix this mess if it was the last thing she ever did. Even if he never spoke to her again. Even if it meant admitting to 3 billionaire investors that she was the world's most incompetent English teacher. Even if it cost her every last shred of professional dignity she had left. She was going to make this right. 3 days had passed since the great business meeting disaster of 2025, and Rose had barely slept, eaten, or done anything resembling normal human behavior. Instead, she had transformed her tiny Brooklyn apartment into what could only be described as a war room, dedicated to saving Francesco Rossi's American business expansion. Her coffee table was covered with printed emails, sticky notes, research articles about Italian business culture, and a growing pile of business cards from every public relations firm, crisis management company, and image consultant in Manhattan. Her laptop had 17 different tabs open, ranging from how to apologize for cultural misunderstandings to last-minute investor relations strategies to jobs in Canada for disgraced English teachers. The last one was her backup plan. Her phone buzzed with yet another rejection, this time from Morrison and Associates. Thank you for your inquiry regarding Mr. Rossi's situation, but we don't believe our firm is the right fit for this particular challenge. Rose translated this from corporate speak. We don't want to touch this disaster with a 10-foot pole. She was contemplating whether moving to a small town in Montana and becoming a sheep farmer was a viable career change when her phone rang. The caller ID made her heart skip. Marcus Whitfield, Francesco's assistant. Hello? She answered. trying to sound professional instead of like someone who had been living on coffee and desperation for 3 days. "Miss Stone? This is Marcus Whitfield. Mr. Rossi would like to see you." Rose sat up so quickly she knocked over her empty coffee mug. "He does?" "Yes. However, I should mention that he's particular about the circumstances of this meeting." "What kind of circumstances?" "He wants to continue with the English lessons." Rose blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "English lessons. He says the investor meeting made him realize how much he still needs to learn about American business culture, and he specifically requested that you continue as his instructor." Rose stared at her phone. "Marcus, are you sure? Because 3 days ago, he literally threw me out of his apartment and told me I'd ruined his life." "Yes, well, Mr. Rossi is a complex individual. He's asked me to inform you that he's willing to pay double your original rate if you can start again today. Same time, same place. Double rate?" Rose's brain quickly did the math. $2,000 a week. That was more money than she'd ever seen in her entire life. But more importantly, it was a chance to make things right. "I'll be there," she said. "Excellent. Oh, and Miss Stone, Mr. Rossi has specifically requested that you focus on more traditional teaching methods this time." Rose winced. "Understood." 2 hours later, Rose stood outside Francesco's penthouse door, armed with actual textbooks, professionally researched lesson plans, and a humility so deep it practically had its own gravitational pull. She had spent the morning at the library, the afternoon consulting with actual linguistics professors, and had even called her college roommate, who now worked at a Fortune 500 company, to verify that every single phrase she planned to teach was appropriate for professional settings. She was not going to screw this up again. Francesco opened the door before she could even knock, as if he'd been watching for her arrival. He looked different, still devastatingly handsome in that unfairly Italian way, but there was something in his expression that she couldn't quite read. Not anger exactly, not forgiveness either. Something more complicated. "Rose," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for giving me another chance," she replied, clutching her bag of legitimate teaching materials like a shield. "Francesco, I need to apologize again for what happened. I've spent the last 3 days trying to figure out how to fix this, and I want you to know that I'm going to do everything in my power to help repair any damage I caused." Francesco studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the living room. "Sit, please." They settled on opposite ends of his massive leather couch, and Rose noticed that he seemed more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, which was odd, considering she'd recently destroyed his most important business meeting. "I need to ask you something," Francesco said, leaning forward slightly. "The expressions you taught me, where did you learn them?" Rose felt her cheeks burn. Well, I thought I knew more current slang than I actually did. I may have gotten some of my information from less than academic sources." "Such as?" "Reality TV," she admitted in a small voice. "And movies. And things I overheard in coffee shops." Francesco stared at her for a moment, then did something completely unexpected. He laughed. Not a bitter, sarcastic laugh, but a genuine, deep laugh that transformed his entire face. "You taught me pickup lines from reality television," he said, still chuckling. "And I used them in a meeting with billionaires." "It's not funny," Rose protested, though she felt a tiny smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "I could have ruined your entire expansion plan." "Could have?" Francesco raised an eyebrow. "Rose, I called Catherine Blackwood a hottie. My expansion plan is definitely ruined." "Not necessarily," Rose said, pulling out a folder from her bag. "I've been doing research, and I think there might be a way to salvage this." She opened the folder and showed him several printed articles. "Look, cultural misunderstandings in international business happen more often than you'd think. There are crisis management firms that specialize in exactly this kind of situation. I've already reached out to 3 of them, and while most won't take the case, I found one that might be willing to help if we approach it the right way." Francesco looked through the articles, his expression becoming more serious. "You've been working on this for 3 days?" Of course I have. This is my fault and I'm going to fix it. Rose. Francesco set the papers aside and looked directly at her. Why? What do you mean, why? I fired you. I was angry, I said terrible things, and I threw you out of my apartment. Most people would have taken their payment and walked away. Why are you trying to help me? Rose felt her throat tighten. Because you didn't deserve what happened. You're brilliant. Your business is amazing, and you came here to honor your father's legacy. I'm not going to let my stupidity be the reason you can't do that. Francesco was quiet for a long moment, studying her face as if he were seeing her for the first time. Okay, he said finally. What do we do? For the next hour, Rose outlined her research. She'd found a crisis management firm called Sterling Communications that specialized in cross-cultural business blunders. Their founder, Patricia Sterling, had built her reputation on helping international executives recover from exactly these kinds of misunderstandings. The key, Rose explained, is to get ahead of the story. We need to contact the investors directly, acknowledge the cultural miscommunication, and demonstrate that you understand American business culture well enough to succeed here. And how do we demonstrate that? More lessons. Real ones this time. I've prepared a comprehensive curriculum based on actual business communication textbooks and consultation with professional linguists. She pulled out her new lesson plans, which were color-coded, cross-referenced, and thoroughly researched. We'll start with formal business terminology, move through appropriate casual conversation, and finish with cultural nuances that will help you navigate not just meetings, but networking events, client dinners, and all the social aspects of American business. Francesco flipped through her lesson plans, looking impressed despite himself. This is very thorough. I don't make the same mistake twice, Rose said firmly. Good. When do we start? Right now if you want. I thought we could begin with proper introductions and professional small talk, then move into… Actually, Francesco interrupted, I have a different idea. Rose looked up from her notes. Oh? Francesco stood up and walked to his kitchen, returning with 2 cups of coffee. I've been thinking about what you said, about Americans preferring casual, friendly language in business settings. You weren't entirely wrong about that. He handed her a cup and sat back down, this time closer to her on the couch. The problem wasn't that you taught me to be casual. The problem was that you taught me to be casual in completely inappropriate ways. So I want to learn both. Both? Formal business English for meetings and presentations, and casual American English for networking and social situations. But this time, I want to make sure I understand the difference between casual and wildly inappropriate. Rose smiled, feeling hopeful for the first time in days. That's actually a really smart approach. We can create different lessons for different contexts. Exactly. But I have one condition. What's that? Francesco leaned forward and Rose caught a hint of his cologne, something expensive and distractingly masculine. I want you to teach me like I don't know anything. Assume I understand nothing about American culture, American humor, American social cues. Start from the very beginning. Rose nodded enthusiastically. That's perfect, actually. It's better to over-explain than to assume knowledge. Good. So for this lesson, pretend that I'm… Francesco paused as if thinking of the right analogy. Pretend that I'm someone who just arrived from another planet and has never interacted with Americans before. I can do that, Rose said, opening her notebook. Let's start with basic greetings and introductions. For the next 2 hours, they worked through fundamental American business interactions. Francesco was an excellent student, attentive, quick to understand, and surprisingly good at picking up on subtle cultural nuances. But Rose began to notice something odd. When she explained that Americans often start meetings with small talk about weather or weekend plans, Francesco asked her to repeat the explanation twice, claiming he didn't quite understand the concept. When she taught him the difference between "How are you?" rhetorical greeting, and "How are you doing?" actual question, he made her demonstrate the conversation 3 times, insisting he needed to see more examples. When she showed him appropriate ways to compliment a colleague's work, He asked so many follow-up questions about tone and context that they spent 20 minutes on a single phrase. At first, Rose was impressed by his thoroughness. But as the afternoon wore on, she started to suspect that Francesco Rossi understood American English much better than he was letting on. "Let's try a practice conversation," she suggested. "I'll be a potential business partner and you can practice introducing yourself and your company using everything we've learned today." "Excellent idea," Francesco said, but then immediately looked confused. "But wait, when you say business partner, do you mean someone I would work with closely? Or someone I would just meet occasionally for meetings?" Rose blinked. They had literally just spent 15 minutes discussing different types of business relationships. "Someone you would work with closely," she said slowly. "Ah, I see. And when I introduce my company, should I mention our European success first? Or focus primarily on our American expansion plans?" This was also something they had covered extensively. "European success first," Rose said, watching his face carefully. "To establish credibility." "Right, of course. And the tone should be confident but not arrogant?" "Francesco," Rose said suspiciously, "are you actually confused about this or are you testing me?" Francesco's eyes widened with what looked like genuine surprise. "Testing you? Why would I test you?" "I don't know, but you seem to be asking a lot of questions about things we already discussed." "I just want to make sure I understand perfectly," Francesco said earnestly. "This is very important to me and I don't want to make any more mistakes." Rose studied his face. He looked completely sincere, but there was something in his eyes, a tiny flicker of something that might have been amusement, that made her wonder. "Okay," she said slowly. "Let's try the practice conversation." They ran through the scenario, and Francesco performed flawlessly. His introductions were polished, his small talk was appropriate, and his business pitch was compelling. He sounded like someone who had been doing American business deals for years. "That was perfect," Rose said. "You clearly understand all of this." "Do I?" Francesco asked, tilting his head slightly. "I still feel very uncertain about many aspects of American business culture. Perhaps we should schedule more lessons? Maybe daily lessons until I feel completely confident?" Rose felt a flutter of suspicion mixed with something that might have been flattery. "Daily lessons? If you have time, of course. I realize this is a significant time commitment, but as you said, this is very important to my father's legacy." He looked at her with those devastating green eyes, and Rose felt her analytical abilities temporarily short-circuit. Yes, daily lessons would be good. Very thorough." "Wonderful. Same time tomorrow?" "Same time tomorrow," Rose agreed. As she gathered her materials and prepared to leave, Francesco walked her to the door. "Rose," he said as she stepped into the hallway. "Thank you." "For what?" "For giving me a second chance to learn this properly, and for working so hard to fix what happened." Rose felt her heart do a little skip. "Of course. I'm just glad you're willing to trust me again." Francesco smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "I'm beginning to think you might be exactly the teacher I need." As the elevator doors closed, Rose leaned against the wall and replayed the afternoon in her mind. Something about Francesco's behavior didn't quite add up, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. Meanwhile, 47 floors above her, Francesco Rossi was standing by his window, looking down at the street below and smiling to himself. His English was, in fact, nearly perfect. He had spent 2 years at Oxford, had conducted business in English throughout Europe, and could probably teach a course on American business culture himself if necessary. But watching Rose work so hard to help him, seeing the guilt and determination in her eyes, hearing the passion in her voice when she talked about fixing her mistakes, well, that was worth pretending to be a little confused about the difference between casual and formal greetings. Besides, he told himself, he really could use the practice with American slang. And Rose Stone, when she wasn't accidentally teaching him to sexually harass investors, was turning out to be a very interesting woman. A woman who deserved a chance to prove that she was as good at her job as she claimed to be, even if it meant he had to pretend not to understand the phrase, "How's it going?" for the 15th time. It was, Francesco decided, a small price to pay for more time with the most unexpectedly captivating teacher he'd ever had. By the end of their first week of legitimate English lessons, Rose had begun to suspect that Francesco Rossi was either the most thorough student in the history of language learning, or he was playing some kind of elaborate game that she hadn't figured out yet. The evidence was mounting daily. On Tuesday, he had asked her to explain the phrase touch base 6 different times, claiming he couldn't understand why Americans would want to literally touch a baseball during business conversations. Then, 5 minutes later, he had used the phrase circle back in perfect context without any explanation at all. On Wednesday, he had insisted that she demonstrate the difference between a firm handshake and a crushing handshake by actually shaking his hand repeatedly. This had led to an awkward 10-minute period where Rose found herself holding Francesco's hand while explaining grip pressure, trying very hard not to notice how warm his skin was or how his fingers seemed to linger in hers just a moment longer than necessary for educational purposes. On Thursday, he had claimed complete confusion about American humor, insisting that she tell him jokes and then explain why they were funny. Rose had found herself doing an impromptu stand-up routine in his living room, while Francesco watched with what she was beginning to recognize as barely concealed amusement, disguised as scholarly interest. And now, on Friday afternoon, Francesco was sitting across from her at his dining table, looking devastatingly handsome in a casual sweater that probably cost more than her rent, claiming that he couldn't understand the concept of networking without a visual demonstration. "So you want me to pretend to network with you?" Rose asked, looking up from her notes. "Exactly," Francesco said earnestly. "In Italy, business relationships are very formal, very structured. This American idea of casual professional relationships is completely foreign to me. I need to see how it works in practice." Rose studied his face. There was something about the way he said completely foreign that sounded just a little too rehearsed. "Francesco," she said slowly, "yesterday you told me a joke about corporate synergy that was actually pretty sophisticated. Are you sure you don't understand American business culture better than you're letting on?" Francesco's eyes widened with what looked like genuine surprise. "A joke? When did I tell a joke?" "When I was explaining the difference between actionable insights and actionable items, you said something about how Americans have so many types of actions that they need to specify which kind they're talking about, like a menu at a restaurant that's too complicated." "That was a joke?" Francesco looked puzzled. "I thought I was just making an observation." Rose stared at him. Either he was the most naturally funny person she'd ever met and didn't realize it, or he was a much better actor than she'd given him credit for. "Okay," she said, deciding to play along. "Let's do a networking simulation. I'll be someone you just met at a business event and you can practice making casual professional conversation." "Perfect." "But Rose?" "Yes?" "What should I wear to a networking event? In Italy, we dress very formally for business occasions, but I've heard Americans are more casual. I don't want to stand out." Rose looked at him sitting there in his expensive sweater and perfectly fitted jeans, looking like he'd stepped out of a Milan fashion magazine, and tried not to laugh. "You look fine," she said. "Actually, you look perfect for a networking event. Very approachable, but still professional." "Approachable," Francesco repeated as if the word were a foreign concept. "Yes, that's important, isn't it? Americans like people who are approachable." "Very important," Rose confirmed. "And how does one look approachable? Is it the smile? The posture? Should I stand differently?" Rose felt that familiar flutter of suspicion, but Francesco looked so genuinely interested in her answer that she found herself launching into a detailed explanation of nonverbal communication and professional body language. "Stand up," she instructed. "Let me show you." Francesco obediently stood, and Rose found herself in the awkward position of having to critique the posture of a man who carried himself like he'd been born wearing expensive suits. "Okay, so right now you're standing very European," she said, walking around him like she was conducting an inspection. "Very formal, very proper. Americans tend to be a bit more relaxed." "Show me," Francesco said. Rose demonstrated a more casual stance, and Francesco mimicked her movements with the focused attention of someone studying advanced physics. "Like this?" he asked, adjusting his shoulders. "Perfect. Now, for conversation starters, Americans love to talk about neutral topics like weather, sports, or current events. Try starting a conversation with me." Francesco nodded seriously, then turned to face her with a smile that made Rose's stomach do an involuntary flip. "Hello," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Francesco Rossi. Beautiful weather we're having, isn't it?" Rose shook his hand, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened at the contact. "Hi, I'm Rose. It really is. Are you enjoying the event?" "Very much," Francesco replied smoothly. "Though I have to admit I'm new to this type of networking. I'm from Italy and we do business a bit differently there." "Oh, how interesting. What brings you to New York?" Francesco's smile became more genuine. "I'm expanding my technology company into the American market. It's both exciting and terrifying." Rose found herself momentarily forgetting that this was supposed to be a practice conversation. Francesco's accent made everything sound more interesting, and there was something in his eyes when he talked about his business that was genuinely captivating. "That sounds amazing," she said. "What kind of technology?" "Mobile applications focused on sustainable living and environmental awareness. We help people make small changes in their daily routines that can have a significant impact on their carbon footprint." Rose blinked. This wasn't part of the lesson plan, but Francesco was talking about his actual business with such passion that she found herself genuinely curious. "That's incredible. How did you get into that field?" "My father," Francesco said, and for a moment his practiced networking smile became something more real. "He always believed that technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. When he died, I wanted to create something that would honor that philosophy." Rose felt her heart tighten. "I'm sorry about your father." "Thank you. He would have loved the idea of bringing our work to America. He always said Americans were the most innovative people in the world, even if they sometimes lacked subtlety." Rose laughed despite herself. "Subtlety is definitely not our strong suit." "No, but your enthusiasm makes up for it. Your willingness to try new things, to take risks, to believe that anything is possible. It's inspiring." They stood there looking at each other for a moment, and Rose realized that somewhere in the middle of their practice conversation it had stopped being practice. "So," Francesco said quietly, "how am I doing? With the networking?" "You're doing great," Rose said, her voice coming out a little breathless. "Really great." "Good. Because I have to admit something." Rose's heart rate picked up. "What?" "I'm starting to think that maybe the problem isn't that I don't understand American business culture. Maybe the problem is that I've been so focused on learning the rules that I forgot the most important thing." "Which is?" Francesco stepped a little closer, and Rose caught that hint of his cologne again. "That the best business relationships aren't built on perfect networking techniques or flawless small talk. They're built on genuine connections between people who find each other interesting." Rose felt like the air in the room had suddenly become much thicker. "Francesco, am I wrong?" he asked, his green eyes searching her face. "Because I find you very interesting, Rose Stone. Much more interesting than I expected when I hired an English teacher." Rose's brain scrambled to remember that this was supposed to be a professional relationship, that she was here to teach him business English, that getting involved with a client was probably the worst idea she'd ever had. But then Francesco smiled, not his polite networking smile or his practiced charm, but a real smile that transformed his entire face. And Rose's brain gave up on rational thought entirely. "I find you interesting too," she admitted. "Even after I got angry and threw you out of my apartment?" "Even after you got angry and threw me out of your apartment. Though, to be fair, I did teach you to sexually harass investors on live video, so your anger was pretty justified." Francesco laughed, a genuine laugh that made Rose's stomach flutter. "Yes, that was memorable. I'm still working on fixing that, by the way. Patricia Sterling from the crisis management firm thinks she can arrange a follow-up meeting with the investors if we can demonstrate that you've made significant progress with American business culture." And have I? Made significant progress? Rose looked at him standing there, relaxed and confident and charming, and realized that somewhere over the past week, Francesco Rossi had transformed from an arrogant, cold client into someone she genuinely enjoyed spending time with. You have, she said. Actually, you've made remarkable progress. Sometimes I think you understand American culture better than you let on. Francesco's expression flickered for just a moment, so quickly that Rose almost missed it. But then he was back to looking earnestly confused. Do I? Because I still feel very uncertain about many things. For instance, what is appropriate to do when you find yourself attracted to your English teacher? Rose's breath caught. What? Is that normal in American business culture, or should I be more European about it? What do you mean European about it? More formal, more restrained. Pretend the attraction doesn't exist and focus only on professional matters. Rose stared at him. Are you saying you're attracted to me? I'm saying that I'm trying to understand the cultural expectations around workplace relationships in America, and I thought you might be able to provide some guidance. Rose felt like she was trying to navigate a conversation in a language she only half understood. Francesco, are we still talking about networking? Are we? Francesco asked, moving close enough that Rose could see the gold flecks in his green eyes. Because I've been wondering that myself. Rose's phone chose that moment to ring, startling them both back to reality. She looked at the caller ID and felt her stomach drop. It's Patricia Sterling, she told Francesco. The crisis management consultant. Answer it, Francesco said, stepping back and instantly becoming more businesslike. Rose answered the phone, trying to ignore the fact that her hands were shaking slightly. Rose? I have news about the investor situation. Good news or bad news? Both. The good news is that Catherine Blackwood has agreed to a follow-up meeting. She's intrigued by your approach to cultural education and wants to see if Mr. Rossi has made genuine progress. Rose looked at Francesco, who was watching her intently. And the bad news? The meeting is Monday, as in this coming Monday. And it's not just a video call, it's an in-person presentation at Blackwood Capital's offices. Catherine wants to see how Mr. Rossi handles himself in a formal American business environment. Rose felt the blood drain from her face. This Monday? As in 3 days from now? I know it's short notice, but Catherine is leaving for London next week, and this is the only window we have. Can you have him ready? Rose looked at Francesco, who was still standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, and tried to calculate whether 3 days was enough time to prepare for the most important business meeting of his life. Yes, she heard herself saying. We'll be ready. Excellent. I'll email you the details. And Rose? This is his only shot. If this meeting doesn't go well, Catherine won't give him another chance. The call ended, leaving Rose and Francesco staring at each other in sudden silence. 3 days, Francesco said quietly. 3 days, Rose confirmed. To prove that I understand American business culture well enough to deserve a second chance with billion-dollar investors. No pressure at all, Rose said weakly. Francesco was quiet for a moment, then walked to his window and looked out at the Manhattan skyline. Rose, he said without turning around, I need to tell you something. Rose's heart rate spiked. What? I may have been less than completely honest about how much help I need with American English. Rose felt a mixture of vindication and panic. What do you mean? Francesco turned to face her, and his expression was more serious than she'd ever seen it. I mean that my English is actually quite good. I spent 2 years at Oxford. I've conducted business in English throughout Europe, and I probably understand American business culture better than I've been letting on. Rose stared at him. Then why? Because, Francesco said, walking back toward her. When someone works as hard as you did to fix a mistake, when someone spends 3 days researching crisis management firms and calls linguistics professors to make sure they never teach you the wrong thing again, that person deserves a chance to prove how good they really are at their job. Rose felt like the floor had shifted beneath her feet. You've been pretending to need help so I could prove myself? I've been giving you the opportunity to show me what an excellent teacher you are when you're not panicking about reality TV slang. Rose didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or hit him with her textbook. Francesco Rossi, she said slowly, you are either the sweetest man I've ever met, or the most manipulative. Francesco smiled, and this time there was nothing practiced or strategic about it. Can I be both? Despite everything, the deception, the confusion, the impossible situation they'd created, Rose found herself smiling back. We have 3 days, she said. 3 days, Francesco agreed. To prepare you for the most important presentation of your life. To prepare us, Francesco corrected. Because Rose, I may understand American business culture, but I still don't know how to fix what happened in that first meeting, and I still need you. Rose looked at him standing there, honest and vulnerable and impossibly attractive, and realized that somewhere between the disaster of their first meeting and the revelation of his deception, she had stopped thinking of Francesco Rossi as just a client, which was either going to make the next 3 days very interesting or very complicated, possibly both. Okay, she said, let's save your American expansion. Our American expansion, Francesco said quietly. And Rose realized that somehow it had become exactly that. The weekend passed in a blur of intensive preparation. Rose had transformed Francesco's penthouse into a business boot camp, complete with mock presentations, cultural sensitivity training, and what she called Investor Psychology 101. By Sunday evening, they had been working for 12 hours straight. Francesco's dining table was covered with presentation materials, cultural etiquette guides, and enough coffee cups to supply a small cafe. Okay, Rose said, pacing back and forth while Francesco sat at his laptop. Let's run through the key points one more time. When Catherine asks about your target demographic, you say, young professionals and environmentally conscious consumers, Francesco replied without looking up from his screen. Not smoking hot babes. Right. And when they ask about market penetration strategies? Strategic partnerships with established American brands and targeted digital marketing campaigns. Rose stopped pacing and looked at him. Francesco was perfectly calm, completely professional, and utterly prepared. His presentation was flawless, his cultural awareness was impeccable, and his business plan was genuinely brilliant. So why did she feel like something was missing? Francesco, she said, sitting down across from him, you're ready. You know that, right? You could give this presentation in your sleep. Francesco finally looked up from his laptop, and Rose was surprised to see genuine anxiety in his eyes. Am I? He asked quietly. Because right now I feel like I'm about to walk into that boardroom and prove that I'm exactly what they think I am. A foreigner who doesn't understand American business and shouldn't be trusted with their investment. Rose felt her heart clench. That's not who you are. Isn't it? Rose, 3 days ago they watched me call a billionaire investor a hottie on live video. Tomorrow, I have exactly one chance to prove that was a fluke, not a fundamental inability to function in American business culture. Rose reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Francesco, listen to me. I've seen you work this weekend. I've watched you analyze market data, refine your business strategy, and prepare for every possible question they could ask. You're not just ready, you're going to be the most prepared person in that room. Francesco turned his hand over so their fingers were interlaced. And what if it's not enough? What if they've already made up their minds? Then we'll figure out another way, Rose said firmly. But I don't think that's going to happen. You want to know why? Why? Rose squeezed his hand. Because when you talk about your work, really talk about it, not just present the numbers, you light up. You become passionate and authentic and completely irresistible. That's not something you can fake or learn from a textbook. That's who you are. Francesco stared at her for a long moment. Irresistible? Rose felt her cheeks warm. I meant professionally irresistible. As a business partner. Did you? Francesco asked, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. Rose looked down at their intertwined fingers and realized that somewhere between Friday's revelation and Sunday's marathon prep session, the lines between teacher and student, professional and personal, had completely dissolved. "Francesco," she said quietly, "what are we doing?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know that I haven't felt this way about anyone in, well, maybe ever." Rose's heart skipped. "You've known me for less than 2 weeks, and for most of that time you thought I was incompetent." "No," Francesco said, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. "For most of that time I thought you were fascinating. The incompetence thing was just a very entertaining bonus." Rose laughed despite the butterflies in her stomach. "This is crazy. You're my client, I nearly destroyed your career. And tomorrow could either be the beginning of your American success story, or the end of everything you've worked for." "All true," Francesco agreed. "Also true. You're brilliant. You saved my career after nearly destroying it, and tomorrow I'm walking into the most important meeting of my life with the most incredible woman I've ever met as my partner." "Partner?" Francesco stood up, pulling her to her feet with him. "Rose, I've been thinking about what happens after tomorrow. Win or lose, I want you to stay." "Stay? In New York? With my company? With me?" Francesco cupped her face in his hands. "I want you to be my director of cultural integration. I want you to help me build my American operations. I want you to teach me things I actually don't know and call me out when I'm being too European and make me laugh when I take myself too seriously." Rose felt like her heart was going to beat out of her chest. "Francesco, I know it's fast," he said. "I know it's complicated. But Rose, tomorrow isn't just about saving my business expansion. It's about proving that we work together, that what we've built in these past 2 weeks is worth fighting for." Before Rose could respond, Francesco leaned down and kissed her. It was soft and sweet and completely perfect, and Rose felt like every rational thought in her head simply evaporated. When they broke apart, Rose rested her forehead against his. "This is either the best idea you've ever had," she whispered, "or the worst." "There's only one way to find out," Francesco said, smiling that smile that made her stomach flip. "By completely acing tomorrow's presentation?" "By completely acing tomorrow's presentation," he confirmed. Rose looked at him, brilliant, determined, and completely impossible, and realized that somehow Francesco Rossi had become so much more than just a client she was trying to help. He had become someone she couldn't imagine living without. "Okay," she said, "let's go save your American dream." "Our American dream," Francesco corrected, kissing her again. And Rose realized that, terrifying as it was, she liked the sound of that. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that made Manhattan look like a movie set. Rose met Francesco in the lobby of the Blackwood Capitol building, both of them dressed in their most professional attire and carrying enough presentation materials to stock a small library. "Ready?" Francesco asked, straightening his tie. Rose looked at him, confident, handsome, and completely prepared, and felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. "Ready," she said. They walked into the elevator together, and Rose realized that win or lose, everything was about to change. The Blackwood Capitol boardroom was exactly as intimidating as Rose had imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, a mahogany table that could seat 20, and an atmosphere that practically whispered, "Billion-dollar decisions are made here." Catherine Blackwood sat at the head of the table, flanked by Robert Chen and James Morrison. All three wore expressions of polite professionalism that revealed absolutely nothing about their thoughts. "Mr. Rossi," Catherine began, "thank you for coming. We're curious to see how you've progressed since our last conversation." Francesco stood at the head of the table, Rose positioned discreetly to his left as his cultural consultant. He looked calm, confident, and completely professional. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity," Francesco replied smoothly. "I want to begin by acknowledging that our previous meeting didn't represent the best of my communication skills or cultural awareness. I take full responsibility for that." Rose held her breath. This wasn't part of their rehearsed opening. However, Francesco continued, I believe that experience taught me something valuable about doing business in America. It's not enough to have a great product or a solid business plan. Success here requires genuine understanding, authentic relationships, and the humility to learn from mistakes. Catherine's eyebrow arched slightly, the first sign of interest Rose had seen. With that in mind, Francesco said, clicking to his first slide, I'd like to present not just my business expansion plan but my commitment to building something truly meaningful in the American market. For the next 20 minutes, Francesco delivered the presentation of his life. He talked about his father's legacy, his company's environmental mission, and his vision for sustainable technology that could change how Americans thought about their daily choices. But more than that, he spoke with genuine passion and authenticity that filled the room. Our target demographic, Francesco explained, consists of environmentally conscious consumers aged 25-45 who want to make sustainable choices but need accessible tools to help them do so effectively. Rose noticed Robert Chen and James Morrison exchanging impressed looks. The American market represents more than just expansion for us, Francesco continued. It represents the opportunity to partner with the most innovative consumers in the world to create real environmental change. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Catherine Blackwood leaned forward. Mr. Rossi, that was genuinely impressive. Your business model is solid, your passion is evident, and your cultural awareness has clearly improved significantly. Francesco smiled. I had an excellent teacher. He glanced at Rose, and she felt her heart skip. However, Catherine continued, I have to ask, can you assure us that the misunderstanding from our previous meeting won't happen again? Francesco nodded seriously. I can assure you that I've learned to distinguish between appropriate professional terminology and slang that has no place in business settings. More importantly, I've learned to ask for clarification when I'm uncertain rather than assume I understand cultural nuances. And your teacher? Robert Chen asked, looking at Rose. Will she be part of your American operations? Francesco turned to Rose with a smile that made her stomach flutter. If she'll have me, yes. I'd like to offer Ms. Stone the position of Director of Cultural Integration for our American expansion. Rose felt like the room was spinning. Yes. Definitely yes. Catherine Blackwood smiled for the first time since they'd entered the room. Well then, Mr. Rossi, I think we're ready to discuss terms. 2 hours later, Francesco and Rose emerged from the Blackwood Capitol building with a signed letter of intent for a $50 million investment and a partnership agreement that would change both their lives forever. We did it, Rose said, still in shock as they stood on the sidewalk. We did it, Francesco agreed, then suddenly swept her into his arms and spun her around, right there on Park Avenue. Francesco, Rose laughed, clinging to his shoulders. People are staring. Let them stare, he said, setting her down but not letting go. Rose Stone, you are officially the Director of Cultural Integration for Rossi Technologies American Division. Is that a real position? It is now, along with a salary that's roughly 10 times what you were making as a freelance English teacher. Rose's eyes widened. 10 times? Plus benefits, stock options, and your own office with a view of the Hudson River. Rose stared at him. Francesco, are you serious? Completely serious. Rose, I meant what I said yesterday. I want you to stay. I want us to build this together. Rose felt tears pricking her eyes. Even after I taught you to sexually harass investors? Francesco laughed, pulling her closer. Especially after you taught me to sexually harass investors. Because you also taught me that the best relationships, business or personal, are built on people who care enough to fix their mistakes and fight for what matters. And what matters to you? Rose asked quietly. You, Francesco said simply. This company, this expansion, this crazy American adventure we're about to embark on together. But mostly you. Rose looked at him standing there in the middle of Manhattan, offering her everything she'd never dared to dream of, and realized that sometimes the universe doesn't destroy your life. Sometimes it just rearranges it into something better than you ever imagined. "Francesco Rossi," she said. "You are definitely the sweetest man I've ever met, and probably the most manipulative. Is that a yes to staying?" he asked, grinning. "That's a yes to everything," Rose said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. As they kissed on the sidewalk outside the building where they'd just secured their future, Rose thought about how 3 weeks ago she'd been sitting on her kitchen floor surrounded by overdue bills, convinced her life was over. Now she was kissing an Italian millionaire who wanted to make her his business partner, and possibly the love of his life, with a job that paid more than she'd ever imagined, and a future that looked nothing like anything she'd planned. It was, Rose decided, the best disaster that had ever happened to her. "So," Francesco said when they broke apart, "ready to revolutionize American environmental technology?" "Ready," Rose said, smiling up at him. "But can we establish one ground rule for our professional relationship?" "Anything. No more reality TV slang in business meetings." Francesco laughed, the sound echoing off the Manhattan buildings around them. "Deal. Though I have to ask, where exactly did you learn those expressions?" Rose grinned. "That's a story for our second date." "Second date?" Francesco raised an eyebrow. "When was our first date?" "Every single lesson," Rose said. "You were just too busy pretending not to understand basic English to notice." Francesco kissed her again, right there in the middle of the sidewalk, while tourists walked around them and traffic hummed past, and New York City continued its relentless pace around them. And Rose Stone, former disaster of an English teacher, current director of cultural integration, and future partner in all things business and personal with the most impossible man she'd ever met, decided that sometimes the best love stories start with the worst misunderstandings. 6 months later, when Rossi Technologies' American division launched to record-breaking success and Francesco proposed to Rose in the office with the Hudson River view that he'd promised her, she would still laugh about the day she taught an Italian millionaire to call investors smoking hot babes. But that's a story for another time. The end.